Welcome to another Observability Lab. This is the place where we bring the relevant topics to you, our observability community. Today's topic is around security and compliance. And I found a perfect person to walk us through some of these use cases that we have announced at Perform that we think are relevant for building and maintaining and operate secure and compliant system. Michiel, welcome to my little lab here. How are you doing?
Thank you very, very much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I'm doing great so far. Let's see how we go after this.
Yeah, we also recorded a podcast a couple of weeks ago. So, folks, we will come up with a lot of references to the existing additional material. As always, find these links in the description of the video. But now I want to pass it over to you. I know we did a lot of announcements at Perform. I want to leverage and use this the couple of minutes that we have now for you to give us a walkthrough on what we think is important right now, how we help our users, and also maybe just a little discussion on what's coming up going forward.
Perfect. So today we'll be talking about security posture management, and then specifically, I'll hint to it at a later on. But specifically, we'll talk about Kubernetes security posture management. So KSPM, as it's known in the industry, it's one of the capabilities that we've introduced in the Dynatrace. And for those of you who watched or attended Perform, we now also announced CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Management. So once you're familiar with the general concept of KSPM, CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Management, will be very, very similar. So the logic and the workflows and the UI, it's all going to be the same. So I think it's a good time to give a walkthrough of this.
Yeah, perfect. And also some of the resources, we'll see that this is on the playground. So folks, again, you will find all the relevant links in the description, whether it's around launch pads or dashboards that it will show, or the app itself is all installed on the playground.
Correct, yes. And this is actually in the playground, so it should be accessible to everyone. So let's start, shall we?
Yeah, go ahead.
So obviously I have a really nice dashboard over here, a launcher. But for anyone else, if you don't have this or you want to try it out in your own environment, right, you go to apps, you go to application security, and then here you see security posture management. So click into this. And let's start with the overview. So this is the general overview of the app. And right from the get-go, we can see a number of things highlighted here. So I'll start at the beginning and then walk you through it. I think one of the main things here is what we see is our system coverage. What this represents is essentially where have we enabled the security posture management feature. So in this particular case, I only have what you see below here. I have 3 clusters lined up. One of them is enabled, so that leads to the 33%. In a production environment, which is obviously much larger, it's a very good benchmark to see, okay, how far am I actually in the security posture management journey for my organization? Where have I enabled this? Where do I still need to look at this and then start to enable it? So it's a nice little overview. And then immediately to the right of that, we can see our frameworks. So currently we support 4 frameworks, the ones that you see in front of you. So CIS, DORA, NIST, and STIG. And those are security compliance frameworks. And the whole point of security posture management is we benchmark your environment, in this particular case, Kubernetes, of course. We benchmark that against certain security and configuration frameworks, whether regulatory compliance frameworks or just security frameworks that are good, right? Not every framework will be applicable to every single industry, but a lot of them will have nuggets and bits in there that might be useful for you as an organization as well, even though you might not need to maintain this from a regulatory point of view. So I can see very clearly from the get-go, okay, how am I benchmarking against these particular frameworks? And all of this is clickable, right? I can click into this. So the next tab we see here is essentially our assessment results. So I can click into this and I can see an entire list that I can filter out, etc. However, what I find slightly better is if I go to the overview again, and I'm interested in CIS. How am I doing in CIS? I click on CIS, and here you can see it's immediately filtered out everything else except CIS. Now, what you see here is all of our rules. So these are the rules that we're benchmarking against. These are based on, in this particular case, the CIS Kubernetes framework. So the rules are set. What's slightly different here from a regular Dynatrace perspective is that we don't look at this from an entity level from a user experience point of view. So in Dynatrace, we often see, hey, this is the entity and this is what's happening there. Whereas for SPM, because it's industry standards and it makes a lot more sense, we look at this from a rule-based level. Because I have an example here, for instance, that this is a high severity rule and I'm failing this 8 times. Now, in the production environment, obviously it's much bigger. If you have 540 clusters that are failing this, you don't want to see 540 separate lines for the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So the viewpoint is kind of turned around, and we look at this from a rule point of view and then let you know exactly where you are failing. So I can see that I'm failing 8 times here. Okay, I want more information. Well, no problem. Let's drill into this. So my site window opens and I can immediately see some more information, right? Now, when we look at this from a GRC perspective, it's very interesting to know where you are passing as well. So government risk and compliance. From a security point of view, it's very important to know that, hey, this is where I'm passing. But when we look at this from a SRE or a platform owner perspective, realistically, we don't really care about where stuff is working. We're much more interested in where stuff isn't working. So where do I actually need to put time and energy in to fix this, right? So we have filtering in here. I can filter out everything except failed. And then I see the clusters where I am failing currently. If we move a little bit over here, we can see all of what resources am I failing on, what's the relevant configuration properties, and what's the result. So all the information that you need as an SRE or a Kubernetes platform owner is in here. Now, because this is based on compliance frameworks, it's very important to have the source in here. So we thought about that as well. So you see the tab here, rule details. I go into this and I can see exactly more information. And critical, we highlight back to the original rules, right? I often get the question, oh, how about custom rules? Can I change these rules? And very simply, the answer is to that, no. And the logic behind it is that these rules are all based on the regulatory frameworks. So in order to maintain their value, they need to observe what the actual framework actually says. Once you start changing those rules, they no longer adhere to the framework. So your compliance results will be skewed.
Yeah. So this also means, again, I'm not an expert at all in this, but it makes a lot of sense. If you could bend the rules, then you would no longer play based on the rules. And so if somebody then comes and audits you and say, hey, are you DORA compliant? Are you NIST compliant? You say, I am, but to my own DORA rules, and that doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, and trust me, I've been in this industry long enough. A auditor will look at you very, very sternly, and you won't be happy for the next weeks. I guarantee you that.
Yeah. Hey, because my limited knowledge in that space, but I've seen something similar in Dynatrace with our vulnerability detection, where we are basically looking at known vulnerabilities, and then we show you where and which components are vulnerable. We also have the concept of risk assessments, and it seems here with the severity, I would assume that somebody that is familiar with our vulnerability capability, they will also be seeing the kind of like the similarity between these two concepts here.
Yeah. And one of the things that I always say is that compliance frameworks are built around minimizing risk. So all of this revolves around about risk and minimizing that particular risk, because that's the main function of it. You want to be as secure as possible, so you want to minimize your risk. So if you're familiar with vulnerabilities and how to handle those and how to prioritize those, security posture management will be a very familiar workflow, because it's trying to achieve the same goals, but then looking from a more configuration point of view instead of vulnerabilities.
Now, if I look at this now, and maybe you go into this anyway in the demo, but you have selected a high severity rule where we have 88 resources assessed, 8 of them are failing. You
Yes.
get all the relevant configuration details. That means as an action item for me, as somebody that now wants to bring this back to all green, is basically looking into these configuration elements that we bring up here and saying, this is the stuff that is violating the rule.
Correct. Yeah. And this is exactly where you are violating the rules. Because when we go back to, let's take an example of the past ones, right? Here we have 0 misconfigurations. So all of these are adherent to the compliance framework, to this specific rule, right? So what this means, if we read the rule essentially, is it's minimize access to the proxy sub resources of the node. So with these 8 clusters, we haven't done that. So we need to look at these particular clusters and minimize that access. And that's really the action point here.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I also really like the whole scoring. I mean, it's, as you said, right, this is very important for easy overview of how much at risk are you to fail the compliance standards. Yeah, no, thank you so much. Really nice.
Yeah, and it's all about prioritization, right? It's you start off with the highs and then you move from medium to low. And if you have criticals, obviously take the criticals first. We all know every organization has limited resources. So having that prioritization and seeing exactly where you need to focus your attention and what is wrong will allow you to very quickly start to remediate all of this stuff. And then more importantly, right, as much as I love the SPM app, what really is exciting to me is the fact that all of this data is Grail based. So all of this is in Grail, which means that if you're familiar with Dynatrace, then most likely you're familiar with DQL, the Dynatrace query language, right? It means we can start to manipulate and work with this data. So obviously, I came prepared. I have a couple of examples of that. So I always think of this from when we look at KSPM, not just from a security and GRC point of view, because that's my background, that's my first initial nature, but I also try to look at this from a SRE or a platform owner point of view. So one of the things that we've done is we've built a dashboard around this, and it's essentially, we call this a cluster view of SPM. And this has taken multiple things in Dynatrace to give you a full overview of any particular cluster that you'd like to look at. So in this particular case, right, I have my Cloud Bleed KSPM Lima cluster, but I have other clusters as well that I could theoretically go into. And the first thing I see is, yes, I see all of my compliance statuses. However, what I can also see is, okay, what kind of vulnerabilities do I have in there? What kind of CPU utilization, memory utilization, and everything do I have? How's my memory, my quota? I have some networking information in here. If I have any drop packets, for instance, I can see that in here. So we all need to see this as part of something bigger. It's a component that will help with managing your entire cluster. So don't see it as a separate entity. Try to find a way to really work this into your operational workflow and start to leverage this information just as you do with everything else, and try to consolidate everything in one, because that will make your life easier, right? Instead of having to look for 3, 4, 5 separate dashboards, in terms of, I have a dashboard for my compliance, a dashboard for my vulnerabilities, a dashboard for my CPU, a dashboard for my memory. Dynatrace has that capability to move it all together, so leverage that capability. So this is more from a visibility point of view, but obviously, because I mentioned the Grail aspect of this, right? The ability for us to manipulate this data with DQL means it's near limitless to what we can do. We always say the sky is your limit, or whatever you can imagine, do it with DQL. But here I have some examples, right? I have, and this is a fairly straightforward DQL query, where I'm just looking, okay, show me my compliance statuses, what I've achieved, my percentage per cluster, per framework. And instead of having that in a dashboard or in the SPM app, I can have it here. I can start to manipulate this. I can use this to leverage this either in notebooks or dashboards or whatever. We can also look, and this is also important from a more security and GRC point of view, but historical information is absolutely critical. So this is an example where I've written this for DORA now, particular, but you can do this obviously with any framework. And really looking at this from, okay, so how am I doing over time? Now, because this is the playground, it's a relatively static environment, but normally in an operational environment, right, you see the fluctuations. And the overall trends we're looking for is always moving upwards. And then if you see it going down, you can immediately take action. And then ultimately, of course, because it lives in Grail, we can start to work with workflows and notebooks, etc., and start to put automations in place, right? We can start to have automated ticketing in place if you're integrating it to Jira or ServiceNow, for instance, pointing that towards the relevant teams, all of that good stuff that we can do with Dynatrace.
Yeah. I would also immediately, with my background as an SRE, would think about defining even SLOs. So what's the ratio between your average failed versus average pass, right? That should be within a certain limit and it shouldn't change that much. So you can define SLOs because all the data is in Grail and everything that is queryable through DQL, you can use as an SLO, even using it with anomaly detection. And then, as you mentioned, creating tickets if something abnormal comes in.
Yeah. So that's the real power, right? We're not unique in our SPM capabilities. There's an entire market of people doing this stuff, rightly so, because it is very important. Where we really come into play is how we leverage this. So Grail is a fantastic asset to us and all of the inherent capabilities that brings to us. So I'm very excited about this stuff.
Yeah, same here. Hey, last question that I have. If you can go back to your app, please, into the Security Posture Management app. So that means by default, you get the overview of all of these rule sets, CIS, DORA, and so on. I see you have the 3 clusters. You mentioned 2 of them are not enabled. To enable SPM on those clusters, technically, what happens is this our agent then collecting additional information, or what does somebody need to know in order to configure and set this up?
Yeah, so for KSPM specifically, one of the requirements is to have Kubernetes monitoring in place because we're leveraging the operator that you deploy with Kubernetes monitoring. So if you have Kubernetes monitoring in place, SPM is just a matter of click on enable and it will start working. And realistically, when I look at this, if someone is interested in SPM and they don't have Kubernetes monitoring already in place, something went wrong in the process. Because you start monitoring first, and then generally you tend to start thinking about security and compliance. So in 99% of all of the cases, it should be as simple as just clicking enable and making sure that the operator is running.
Cool. Awesome. So this app is available for everyone on the Dynatrace Hub. It's easy to enable on individual Kubernetes clusters. And I think you mentioned this in the beginning. We're starting with Kubernetes, but there is other environments and tech stacks that we are expanding this to. Anything else before we part ways?
Yeah, so it's currently not yet fully available on the hub yet, because we're still limiting the release of this. Now, it is available, right? Let me start that off first. If you're interested in this, reach out to support, reach out to your Dynatrace AE, and they can enable this. One of the reasons why we've done this, and this requirement will soon disappear, thankfully, is currently we support vanilla Kubernetes only. The next steps from a KSPM point of view, besides adding more frameworks and more support for different frameworks, is adding more technology stacks. So EKS, AKS, GKS, they will all become available. Once we support those, and that will be relatively soon, we're going to take that requirement out, that you need to reach out to your AE, because right now we want to make sure that we set the right expectations with people using this. So we think that's really important. And obviously with Perform just behind us, Cloud Security Posture Management will soon be active as well, which is a very interesting capability as well.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. And it's also good to see that we want to make sure that people understand what they get today, what they get tomorrow, and how they can get it today. And for me, I can just echo what you said. The biggest advantage of what we have is that we don't see and operate on this data in silo, but we are connecting it with all of the other data that we have. You showed the security vulnerabilities, you showed infrastructure, you showed dashboards that really link all this data together. And besides just dashboards, we also have the automation capabilities. And that's also what gets me excited when I see that we have now all of these new use cases available for our users.
We'll keep you busy.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. With this, thank you so much for the overview, folks. Hopefully this gets you excited as well, because you can see that there's so much more we can do with that platform that you have at your fingertips. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you.